Drilling platforms like this one, operated by the Standard Oil Company of California in the waters of the Pacific, drive their probes beneath the ocean floor in many directions, seeking petroleum deposits. Lying offshore, these mechanical marvels run quiet and in harmony with their surroundings, without disturbing the fish and plant. Thus, man looks to the sea for a source of energy and food needed to assure his future. And now, for your pleasure, the Standard Oil Company of California presents Seashore Oddities.
The beauty of Monterey Peninsula, 100 miles south of San Francisco, is well known, but few know it as the home of some of California's oddest animals. For the study of marine life, Stanford University chose Mussel Point for Marine Station. Among the rocks along the shore live multitudes of curious creatures. Only at times of lowest tides are their homes accessible. Here they live and die, protected from sight by the sea, and from the sea by walls of rock. The crashing power of the waves is broken by the rocks that shield the delicate inhabitants living on their shoreward side. In these protected pools, the water flows gently. To find these strange animals, the rocks must be turned over and the underlying areas examined. Many forms are shell-backed and tough. They adhere tightly to the stone and must be pried off. Others are so frail that they lose all semblance of form when removed from water. By sifting the sand through the fingers, we discover certain creatures that bury themselves. Buckets containing seawater-filled jars serve for transporting the specimens to a more convenient location where they may be studied or photographed in glass tanks. Hundreds of varieties live together, cooperating or warring for survival. These animals are divided into groups as different from each other as are fish, birds, and mammals. The first group we shall examine is Coelenterata, or the hollow-bodied animals. These take many forms. Among the simpler are these hydroids that live in a colony and individually look like pin-sized tubes. The tentacles around the mouth capture tiny swimming animals. Watch closely on the left and you'll see one snatch in his prey. The members of the colony share the work of living. Some only catch food, others fight off enemies, and a few are chosen to reproduce the young. The bell-like fish swims by jet propulsion. Moving at will, he catches food with his trailing, stinging tentacles and carries it to the mouth, hung inside the bell. Jellyfish with long tentacles like these are expert fishermen. Frequently, they swim to the surface, fling wide their tentacles, and then float downward, catching all small prey within the scope of their paralyzing nets. Anthozoa, or flower animals, are the most complex of the hollow-bodied animals. The sea anemones vary greatly in form and color. This anemone, as big as a spool of thread, has a soft, feathery appearance, but it has the same paralyzing tentacles as the jellyfish, presenting mortal danger to its unwary neighbors. Anemones not destroyed by surf or sun may live 100 years. Many forms reproduce by tearing them, each half regenerating itself. Other varieties growing as large as pint jars catch these brine shrimp and even small fish and crabs. Each tentacle about the mouth is crammed with batteries of stinging cells. A trigger, when touched by some unfortunate creature, fires a thread from the cell. This thread, actually a tiny hollow tube, is kept coiled within the cell until activated. When the trigger is tripped, the cell contracts, and the thread is suddenly extended like the finger of a glove being reversed. Some of them entangle the prey, and others are barbed to penetrate hard layers. These carry a poison which enters and paralyzes the victim. All food is carried to the central mouth and dropped into the interior cavity where it's digested. hollow bodies capture and consume food in this manner. Larger food requires more violent reactions. This is not Milady's bonnet, but a gaudy flower animal. Higher in the scale of life are the Echinodermata, or spiny-skinned animals. Familiar to all is the starfish, which has jointed spiny plates in its skin. These animals grow like the spokes of a wheel and can move easily in any direction. There's no head or tail, no right or left, only the 5 or more arms extending from the little disc. Most of them are sluggish in their actions, and these specimens may be said to be moving at the normal starfish gallop. This small one left his brothers on the rocks and made the bottom sands his home. He might well be called the acrobat of his kind because of his ability to balance himself. Loose sand render most starfish helpless, but this fellow scampers about with the greatest of ease. His scant 2-inch size is quite a contrast to the greatest of all sea stars, Pycnopodia, which may measure 36 inches and weigh many pounds. More flexible than most of his kind, he is constantly in motion. He feels soft to touch because of the large feather-like gills that cover his back and the soft tube feet massed on the underside. With these tube feet, too numerous to count, he moves across the rocks to which he can hold so tightly that some of his feet are left behind if he's torn away. With his rays continuously searching, he prowls the rugged bottom. If at any time his environment becomes unhealthy, he may walk off in several directions, tearing himself apart in the hope that maybe at least one part of his body will find a favorable spot in which to regenerate a new star. This creature operates his feet by water pressure. A tiny sac forces water in and out of each accordion-pleated tube, thus extending or retracting the little suction cup at the end of the foot. These powerful feet hold the food against the mouth, centered in the underside. Squatting over a shellfish, the star uses its suckers to tear it from the rock or pull open the powerful shells. In the struggle, the shellfish, with but 2 muscles to close its shell, tires before the starfish, who uses his many feet in relays. The mouth, encircled by fixed plates, cannot be opened to admit size. The stomach is turned inside out, extended through the mouth to envelop and digest the prey within its own shell. Daintier stars live on worms and algae, as does Serpent star. Because he lives in the sand, suckers would be useless, and he moves by means of his agile, spiny arms. He feels safest when buried, so back he goes, leaving only his pattern on the sand. Down below, he will move about as easily as he did on the top. Brighter stars, half this fellow's size, are known as brittle stars. If an arm is caught, they will drop it as quickly as a lizard drops his tail. Instead of laying eggs, as most sea stars do, some of these brood their young in special puzzle discs and bring forth tiny but fully developed starfish. Another interesting relative of the sea star is the sea urchin. These animated pincushions live among the loose rocks and in open fissures, gleaning ocean refuse. Long, hard spines on ball and socket joints keep enemies at a safe distance. Pushing himself into crevices, he sometimes is unable to escape, and as he grows, his moving spines revolve, wearing a smooth, round hole within which he continues to live. Like the sea star, the urchin also has tube feet. But unlike the stars, urchins have 5 sharp teeth that tear up bits of decaying food. The sand dollar is an urchin that took to the sand and grew flat. This picture is speeded up to show the manner in which he burrows into the sand, leaving himself partly exposed to the water. His flat underside is covered with short, sharp spines, whose waving motion carry him along the sand surface or bury him. When sand is dropped on this underside, you see how it would work into the spines if he were right side up, thus giving him a foothold. His topside, slightly peaked in the center, is covered with shovel-shaped spines, overlapped like shingles on a roof. The tube feet these fellows once had are now reduced to gills in the leaf-shaped patterns, covered by the flattened spines. The sand rolls off when these spines are moved, instead of working in. Mollusca, or the soft-bodied animals, branched from the tree of life about the same time as the spiny skins. The sea hare is a member of the group, as are his relatives the snail and the clam. He is a gastropod, or stomach foot, so called because the large muscular foot, which carries him along the rocks, appears to be his belly. Actually, his viscera is sandwiched between the cape or mantle on his back and this foot. He is typical of all his kind that browse on tender seaweed growing on the stones. He may achieve a length of 18 inches and is a giant compared to any of these little nudibranchs, the animals with naked gills that follow. More commonly, they are known as sea slugs because they are the ocean's counterpart of the drab and ugly garden slug. But have you ever seen one with neon lights? These little creatures vary in size, but most would fit on a woman's pointed fingernail. Each glides along on its large foot and breathes with unprotected gill tufts on its back. These may be like a feather duster, or more like this one's bright rosette. Near or on the head are several tentacles. The after pair are smelling organs and have eyes or light-sensitive spots at their bases. Often there are numerous projections from the back that take many shapes and colors as the closely packed pimples on this sea lemon. Or they may appear as the sparser yellow dots on this little white creature. In many forms, these projections have become enlarged and serve as gills. You may have noted that bright colors are predominant. This is often protective, blending with the alga or sponge-encrusted rocks on which they choose to live, or serving as a warning to enemies. Some of these animals have intriguing names, like this one, Dia ulula. Isn't that a lulu? Or maybe Hopkinsia rosacea, the Hopkins rose, named after Timothy Hopkins, who founded the Marine Station. Perhaps if you should discover a new one and describe it in a text, it would be named after you. This one is interesting, as you can see the heart beating in the center of the back. Note the tentacles of the anemone on which he lives. He feeds by taking chunks from the anemone's side. His dinner host then regenerates the eaten parts, and so this animal may eat his cake and have it too. This one has not yet been described in textbooks. Of the many terms that might be used, a Roomba costume possibly describes her best. Hermesenda is quite a warrior. He feeds on the animals with stinging cells in their tentacles. The heads of these he bites off, tentacles, stinging cells and all, but without discharging any of the threads. Through some ingenious mechanism of his digestive tract, he separates the stinging cells intact from the rest of the food and sends them into the bright tips of the feather-like projections on his back. If an enemy attacks, the feathers are pointed in his direction, and the stinging cells are expelled to discharge against the foe. Nature helps those who help themselves. Rarely is the beauty exhibited by Flabellina iodinea seen among flowers or even among animals. Some of these creatures show color that appears to be of a fluorescent nature, becoming much more brilliant in light that is high in ultraviolet rays than in the light of dull and shadowy places. Crawling upside down on the surface of the water is one of the tricks of this aquatic trapeze artist. Swinging by his tail from a thread of mucus secreted by his foot is another. He is able to swim quite freely by flattening his body in this way and flapping from side to side. Most of the stomach-footed animals grow shells on their backs, as does this limpet. The shell is formed by secretions of the mantle. Looking at the underside, it shows around the edge. The very large foot makes it difficult to pry him from the rock. His shell is pulled down tightly to help keep him from being eaten by his enemies. The limpet breathes with the gills you see as a fringe between the foot and the shell-covered mantle. All gastropods rasp off their food with a flexible file-like band inside their mouths. Here you can see his tongue working. It's fastened at both ends and covered with tiny teeth. The tongue is pressed against the food and scrapes it into bits. Meet Mr. Abalone face to face. It is his foot that makes such fine abalone steak. This commercially important snail is abundant only along the California coast and with the greatest numbers in the Monterey area. It is commonly believed that this fellow is of a very sedentary nature, but when turned over, he is power and activity personified. Attaching the tip of his foot to the rock, he turns and twists and pulls. If he can't make it on one side, he tries the other until finally he gets the proper leverage, turns himself upright again, and once more on his foot, his retreat is hasty. He can hardly be called sedentary. This coy little snail who bows her way in is a very interesting creature. She creeps along on a large foot and carries her spiral house on her back. Look beneath the shell on top of the foot, and there you'll see a horny plate which serves as her front door when she retires within her shell. Preferring sand to rock, she digs down until only the tip of her waving siphon is left at the surface of the sand. The siphon serves as a channel to carry water for breathing. When she unwinds herself to come out of her shell, you get a better view of the large sled-like foot with which she plows herself down into the sand, leaving a trail of slime behind her. Now we come to the chitons, or armored animals. Their armor consists of 8 overlapped shells growing from the mantle. When one of these animals is pulled from his rock, he will roll up armadillo fashion. In most of the chitons, the mantle is uncovered at the margin where it may be smooth or furry. From the bottom, chitons look like the gastropods. There are some whose shells take on the color of the rock, as this whitish one does, to blend with the granite stone, or this orange one to match the brilliant sponges on the rock, or one may be green and fuzzy, like the alga that he eats. Rarely moving in the daytime, they accumulate on their shells marine plants and animals that attach themselves to hard surfaces and provide effective camouflage. You often hear of Old Man Octopus, but seldom see him. His foot grows from his head and is divided into arms, so he is called a head-foot animal. His mouth is in the middle of his foot, where his sharp beak crushes shell and bone. He is the most complex of the soft-bodied animals. Next we come to Arthropoda, or animals with jointed feet. The hermit crab is the clown of the seashore. Brought into this world with a soft and unprotected body, he makes his home in a snail's abandoned shell. He climbs the rocks and scampers on the sand, always acting like a perfect fool, until he grows so large his shell begins to pinch. So then he'll have larger quarters. Then you may see his soft curled body, a delicious morsel for his enemies. Finding a likely home, he looks inside to be sure it's safe and pops in. It does not take him long to make himself comfortable, and then, righting his house, he immediately falls to work scavenging the ocean and eating anything that he can find. Never let him be disparaged, since he is a useful little creature. The barnacle stands on his head inside his volcano-like shell and rakes the water with his hind feet. These feet, all working together, hooked fingers, and strain all minute food particles from the water passing through their hairy edges. The barnacle and the other animals continue their struggle for life as the tide returns once again to cover the seashore pools and their creatures. John Grover speaking.